our curbside pickup again soon. So more to come on that, and that you need right now. That kind of leads me into the reason that we decided to start doing these virtual events. It's interesting, because reading is such a solitary act, and yet we as bookstores rely so much on events to create community for the folks in our neighborhoods and community for authors to meet the people who are so touched by their work. And so we wanted to kind of maintain that even now, and also acknowledge that art is a survival resource, and it's always going to be the resource that we at Tattered Cover prioritize over anything else. I don't think we have any interest in begging folks for business. I think we're living in the mindset of there is always enough of the things that are most important, and we need to learn how to spread them out properly. And so if art is the resource that we are focused on, we're here to remind you that we have an abundance of it, and we will always be here shipping you books and handing you books again in person when we can. So with that said, I'm going to bring Amy on here really soon, but I want to let you all know how excited I am to have her first, because Amy Myerson is a lovely author who I was lucky enough to meet in my very own bookstore, Tattered Cover, in the summer of 2018, I believe. And I have just cherished becoming friends since then, and cherished any opportunity to sort of get her books out into the world. So we'll do that. Just so you all know, we do have more events coming up soon. We have Cody Simpson for his book Prince of Neptune tomorrow, same time. And we have the Bookshop Band at 1:30 on Friday for a weekly concert. And we are rolling out events all of the time. So keep your eye on our website, keep your eye on our Instagram, and we will be announcing more soon. There are lots of things that are already posted. I'm not going to list everything, but take a look and see if there's anything you may be interested in. So without further ado, we are here to talk about The Imperfects by Amy Myerson. I know this is backwards for you all. Sorry about that. This book came out yesterday. It is Amy Meyerson's second novel. Many of you may know her for Bookshop of Yesterdays. And I'll give you a little bit of information about her. Amy Myerson is the best-selling author of The Bookshop of Yesterdays, which has been translated or will be translated into 11 languages. She's been published in numerous literary magazines, and she teaches in the writing department at the University of Southern California, where she completed her graduate work in creative writing. Originally from Philadelphia, she currently lives in Los Angeles. So I'm going to invite Amy to join us, and we will talk about The Imperfects. Hello.
Hi, I thought we were having it angled the other way, so hold on, I have to make the my stack of books that I
Does it work this way?
yeah, some different people have different preferences, so this works well.
Maybe I should have been doing it that way all along. It's so funny when we upload these to YouTube and they are just very tall.
Yeah. I guess either way is good. Okay. I think that's good. Great.
Cool. Hello.
Hi. Hi. It's nice to see you.
So nice to see you too. It's been a long time.
I know.
I'm so excited that The Imperfects is out in the world. I remember when Bookshop of Yesterdays had just come out, and you and I were talking about the research you were doing for this book for the first time. Like, I'm really interested in this diamond, I think.
Yeah, and it kind of grew from there. I ended up doing a lot more research than just gemological research, which I hadn't expected. But that's what I love about researching a book is you just kind of follow the breadcrumbs and they lead you to really interesting stories from the past.
Yeah. I was talking to Emily St. John Mandel a few weeks ago, and one of my favorite things that she said was just how kind of she lets herself get obsessed with something and then follow her obsessions, wherever they go, and then turn it into the interesting kind of woven stories of a lot of research. Like you kind of did that too.
Yeah, and I like that because it's fun to write about something that you don't know that much about before you started researching, because then you discover alongside the readers, or you discover for the readers, I guess. And that kind of discovery, which I think definitely happens with her books, is present on the page. Um,
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So, for folks who don't know about the Imperfects yet, can you give us the sort of quick description? What is this book about?
sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll hold up, show my book a little bit while I say something. So, The Imperfects is about a dysfunctional family called the Millers, who, upon their grandmother's death, they discover that she's left them this brooch. And the family hasn't seen each other for about 6 years when the novel starts. It's a fractured family. And right after they get this brooch, they realize that it has something called the Florentine Diamond in it, which is a real diamond. In real life, it's been missing since 1918, and it's currently still missing. So it was part of the Austrian crown jewels. Before it was in the Habsburg Empire, it belonged to the Medicis. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that later, but it has this really rich history to it that kind of drops off right when the diamond disappeared. So in my novel, it appears in this family's grandmother, Helen, her jewelry box, and they have to figure out how she had it and whether or not it legally belongs to them, because there's some other parties who think it should be theirs as well. So then kind of along the way, they discover secrets about their grandmother and begin kind of a healing process within their family.
Do you want to give us a little reading from it to start and
Sure.
get into
Yeah.
details?
It's fun because I think a lot of times in these virtual events, you don't really get to, I haven't gotten to read. So it's a treat to read a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to read towards the beginning of the book. This is where the novel kind of shifts between all of the family's perspectives, but I would say Beck, the youngest daughter, who's in her 30s, so she's not that young, is she when she finds the brooch, she thinks it's just a piece of costume jewelry that her grandmother had. And so she wears it to work. And one of her coworkers thinks it might be valuable. So she contacts the only gemologist that she knows, which is this man, Victor. So the only three names really in this part you need to know are Beck, one of the Miller siblings, Victor, the gemologist, and Helen, who is her grandmother, who's passed away. Okay. Gemstones aren't rocks to Victor. They aren't a commodity, the promise of eternal love, a marker of social status. They are millions of years of history, he's told Beck, first as carbon in the mantle, then as discoveries among the rubble of the Earth's crust, and finally as physical evidence of the many lives that touched each stone. If anyone will know whether Helen's brooch is valuable, it's Victor. As instructed, Beck walks directly to Victor's building on Rittenhouse Square. When Victor opens the door, he looks younger than a year ago, closer to 60 than 71. He wears a fitted black cashmere turtleneck, his white hair slicked back, his signature diamond ring adorning his pinky finger. Beck follows Victor into the living room, lined with shelves of old hardback books, where he offers her a flute of bubbly. Victor helps himself to a glass and sits in the regal leather chair across from hers. So let's see this mystery brooch, he says, crossing his legs. Beck finds the orchid brooch at the bottom of her purse. When she gives it to Victor, he stares at it for longer than she would have expected. He shifts his hand so the stone dances in the light. While his expression remains impassive, Beck detects a spark in his eyes as the brooch shimmers in his palm. On the coffee table, Victor locates a loupe and lifts it to his right eye as he leans toward the orchid brooch. It's a tiny noise, almost imperceptible, but Beck hears it. Victor's cough as he surveys the large stone. This was your grandmother's? Victor finally asks, his eyes still burrowed into the loupe. Is it antique? Beck asks. Victor returns the loupe to the coffee table. He holds the orchid to his cashmere sweater. It's a fur clip, custom job. A fur clip? The only thing Beck can imagine less than her grandmother owning a valuable piece of jewelry is clipping it to a mink stole. Oh, Helen, this must really be amusing you now. Victor flips the brooch over, pointing to a stamp along a ring of metal circling the girdle of the yellow stone. It reads 950. Platinum, Victor explains. During the war, platinum wasn't available to jewelers, so this is definitely post-war. Beside 950, the letters SJ are engraved. That's what's called a maker's mark, Victor says, like a jeweler's logo. I don't recognize this one, though. It's not one of the big houses. He flips the brooch back over and draws a circle in the air above the petals. And I actually have a picture of the brooch that I can show afterwards if people want. This type of pave was popular in the 50s. My guess is it was fabricated in 54, 55. His finger traces the large yellow-green stone at the center, which Beck is starting to suspect is indeed a peridot, and smiles outright. Here's where things get interesting. Given the era, this should be a brilliant cut. Instead, it's a double rose cut, which went out of fashion in the early 1900s. It's unheard of in mid-century jewelry. His face grows even more youthful as he tries not to giggle. Is it a peridot? Beck isn't sure she pronounced the name of the stone correctly. Given Victor's expression, she assumes she's butchered it. Beck, he says excitedly, this is a diamond. Beck knows nothing about diamonds. She's always preferred turquoise to emerald, silver to gold. Still, she knows that her sister's sizable diamond is 3 carats, a mere pebble compared to the rock in Victor's hand. A diamond? But it's so big. I know. They stare at the large yellow diamond glittering with lush color. Suddenly, Beck feels dizzy. Helen's most valuable belonging, other than the house on Edge Hill Road, is a decades-old television set. How could Helen have owned a diamond like this? Not owned, possessed. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, Victor cautions.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I love that selection because it kind of like gives little intros to a lot of the things I want to talk to you about. But I think since we kind of mentioned research, perhaps that's the place to start. And I definitely do want to see the picture of the brooch that you're talking about, because I don't think I realized the brooch was real, because it seems like there's a true story of a diamond that's lost, right?
Yeah. Well, so it's not here. I'll just show you. It's not real. Basically, so when the Florentine Diamond went missing in 1918, it was part of this elaborate hat pin that was designed to be worn on a crown. The Habsburgs hadn't actually worn it for a while because they thought it was cursed, and several famous people like Marie Antoinette, she's the most famous, died who had worn the Florentine Diamond. So they didn't want to wear it, so it was kept in a museum. But when it went missing, it was in this. It was part of this hat pin. So one of the things that the experts I talked to told me was that it's very unlikely that if it turned up 100 years later, it would still be in its original setting. Most likely it would also have been recut to mask its identity, but I didn't want to do that for several reasons in the book. So what I wanted to have happen is I wanted Helen, the grandmother, to have reset it in something that was significant to her, and also that would allow me to plant clues for the characters to find. So during my research, I went to the Gemological Institute of America, which is in Carlsbad. It's open to the public, so if anyone's going to Legoland and wants to make a side trip or just go there, I told them I'd plug them whenever I could. It's really, really wonderful. So when I was there, I got to meet with a lot of people, and one of the people I met with was their librarian and historian. And over the next couple months, she helped me design this orchid brooch. So it's just a drawing. There's not actually a real brooch of it, although I had a fantasy of getting one made. So this huge thing here is a to scale replica of the Florentine Diamond. It's 137 carats. So if people know anything about diamonds, that's massive. It's like the size of a quail egg or a robin's egg. And then this is I actually don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Catalia. It's a certain kind of orchid. And so this is the Paved Diamonds. And then here I have it as red because I originally wanted it to be rubies. But in the book, it's green and they're emeralds because the historian I talked to told me that it's unlikely in mid-century jewelry that they would have matched yellow and pink together.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I love that it's emeralds. I like kind of picturing the yellow and green together.
Yeah. Emerald's my birthstone, so I figured, and I guess it's the birthstone of my book too because it's May.
Has your birthday already happened?
No, it's in a couple weeks.
Okay. Mine, so see you there. Okay. I, it's interesting because you mentioned to me that a lot of people have asked about the diamond and about all the research on the diamond. Um, I'm actually really interested in all of the other things that you researched to situate your characters around this sort of historical event. So if you don't mind, um,
Yeah.
talking a little bit about those things. You sort of make your details in research. Like you talk about very specific elements of dress tailoring when the grandchildren are going through their grand things and they find dresses that she's made. You talk about very specific elements of tarot cards when their sort of eccentric mom Deborah pulling cards to sort of understand the energy of the home that she's in. There's a lot of law research, it seems like, because there's this whole case, right, of whether or not the grandchildren legally own the diamond. So can you talk about your research process a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, one thing that's really important to me is I try to make everything as accurate as possible. And I like that you picked up, I think there's different kind of levels of research. So the main areas of research that I did, of course, were gemological. They're also historical. So since the diamond went missing in 1918 and was part of the Habsburg Empire, I had to learn a little bit about the Habsburgs. I also had to sort of invent a history for the diamond for the next 100 years until it shows up in the present. So that led me to doing a lot of research, not just on the Habsburgs, but on Austria and World War I and World War II. And then also, and one of the parts I wanted to make sure was accurate because I didn't know that much about it, was what would happen after the diamond resurfaced and other parties found out. So in the book, the Austrians want to claim the diamond back as their cultural heritage. The Italians do as well. So before it was an Austrian heirloom, it was an Italian heirloom. And I won't get too much into it, but there's, after World War I, a lot of the Medici property was supposed to go back to Italy. So there's always questions if it's anything that ever belongs to the Medicis about whether or not it should be Italian or someone else's. So I think actually probably the most research I did was in the law stuff. I read a lot. It sort of follows similar to the Nazi looted art cases. So I read a lot about those. But what interested me about my case was it was sort of the opposite of those, where when usually what happens in those instances is that a museum has a piece of art that was unlawfully taken from a family, a Jewish family during World War II. And so the question becomes whether or not it should go back to the family. And in my book, it's kind of the opposite, that this family has this cultural heritage of a country. And so the question is, should they get to keep it, or should it be returned to the country where it could be in a museum and thousands of people could see it. And then, as you mentioned, I did a lot of other smaller research along the way. I looked up some tarot cards, and of course I now forget what some of the ones I put in the book mean, just because, what I always liked when I was in school about English classes and stuff is that I didn't have to take tests. I could just kind of inform my brain and then write something. So I'm better at that than like retaining all the facts. But yeah, I think it's nice to have those kind of levels of research because some of them you can do in scene. Like I knew I wanted to have tarot cards and horoscopes for the character Deborah, the mother, and I wanted them to mean certain things. So I just looked that up real fast. Whereas in order to figure out how this case, it's a civil forfeiture case in the book, would unfold, I needed to talk to several lawyers, which is a lot longer. In general, I find, I don't know if there's writers listening, but in general, I find that talking to people when you're researching is both more engaging and more effective than just reading books. They can, and I should say more efficient too. So I befriended the palace historian in Vienna at Schönbrunn Palace, and it was amazing. He was really excited that I was writing a book about the Habsburgs. So when my research in books led me to a dead end, I would just kind of email him probably some bizarre questions. And then he would get back to me within a day with this very intricate answer that was so much more than something I could have learned myself.
Wow.
So yeah.
So in
Um,
process, how did you just kind of email people and say, hey, I'm writing this book. Would you be willing to talk to me? Or how did you reach out to experts?
yeah, it was a combination. So there were a few. My dad is a lawyer, so he connected me to some lawyers, but more so for like inheritance law and stuff like that. So I guess I got a few contacts through family and friends, but most people I just cold emailed. And people tend to be really responsive when you're saying you're writing something about their area of expertise. And I think like the narrower the area of expertise and perhaps the more niche, the more people are excited to share it with the outside world. I got connected to the Gemological Institute. I really love this story because it's very like bookish. I got connected to them when I was on tour for my first book, The Bookshop of Yesterdays. I did an event so that's in Carlsbad, the Gemological Institute, but I did an event in upstate New York in Saratoga with Northshire Books. And at the end of the event, when someone asked me what my new book was about, that I was working on, I mentioned the diamond, and there just happened to be a woman who lived in Carlsbad or somewhere around there who worked for GIA and was home visiting her mom and happened to attend my event. So she came up to me afterwards and asked if I wanted a tour. And so much of what I included in the book, I don't think I could have done if I hadn't met the people there. So I love that. And it's the same with how I met you. You just happened to be sitting at the table when I went in and introduced myself. So there's a serendipity to bookstores.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, absolutely. And it's so wild, sort of how things drop into your lap sometimes exactly when they need to, even
Yeah,
if perhaps you're not ready yet.
definitely. Yeah, I mean, I was surprised by some of the people who got back to me, like the palace historian I mentioned. I really hoped that he spoke English, and I was correct. And I talked to a former federal prosecutor who I read one of his articles in an academic journal and told him I was interested in it. And yeah, so I think the biggest thing I learned with this book is how amazingly generous strangers can be.
It's true. It's very true.
Yeah.
This is also, perhaps we don't need to get into it, but you are the first person who ever said to me, you should just cold email. They might respond to you. It has changed the trajectory of a lot of things for me. So thank you for that.
Of course. Yeah, I think, email's weird. It can sometimes be hard to know what tone you're striking, particularly with people you've never met before. But in general, I think it's surprising how often people will respond to you.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a generosity to people that I think we tend to discount. Definitely.
Yes.
Okay. So character details. Some of those things research too. I'm of course I think weirdly interested in Deborah, the mother. But you have a lot of sort of ways that you let us know or key us into characters based on small details about their life. Like Jake, who works at Trader Joe's and goes and gets tacos on lunch break with his friend at this food truck, I think, every day. And Deborah, who meets someone, the gemologist actually guesses that he must be a Scorpio on their first meeting, and so she doesn't like him. And so I wanted to ask you about how you think about writing characters, and if you're an author who, hangs out with your in your mind, or if you converse with them in some way.
Sure. Well, it's funny because I think Deborah, the mom, is my favorite character too, and she's probably the one that's least based off. All my characters are often a composite of different people I know, but she's the one who's like is most invented. I think I tend to be one of those writers who starts with story and plot. That's what pulls me into an idea, and then I remember, oh right, it's the characters that tend to engage me as a reader and engage other people. So that's where I think I have to put in a little bit of extra work. One of the things I did with this book that was really, really helpful, which I actually mentioned in my reading a tattered cover for the Bookshop of Yesterdays, was I have this questionnaire that's been passed around that I got in grad school. And I'll make the same offer here that I made at my reading in tattered cover, which is if you email me through my website, I'll send it to you, this questionnaire. But it's this really, really detailed questionnaire about your characters to get to know all sorts of things about them that never make it on the page. And in the past, I've always kind of dabbled in it, but never done the entire questionnaire because it's really long. And for this book, I did it for all of the main characters. And it led me to details big and small, you know, everything from, Jake working at Trader Joe's to his relationship with his girlfriend, Christy, and his failed screenplays. So I got a lot out of doing that in terms of the smaller character details, but also it was really important to me in this book that the present be as rich as the past. That's part of why I set the whole novel, other than a short prologue at the beginning, in the present, because I really wanted it to be the stories of the stories of the family in the present, and sort of looking at how the past informs the present. I didn't want to do kind of the traditional story where you go back and forth between a past story and the present, because I think what happens with that a lot is that the present gets shorted. So I wanted to make sure each of the carrying on that are independent of the story of their grandmother and the diamond.
Absolutely. Prologue at the beginning. I'm going to flick to it really quickly because I have questions about this.
Sure.
As well. So you'll see here, Vienna 19 is where we sort of start. Also, this is a paperback, but just as Amy's book is out in hardcover, this is fake. So you open in Vienna 1918, and you really, which is when the diamond went missing. And you open by giving us exactly what happened. You sort of lay it out. You know, we as an audience are not confused about what happened to the diamond at all. And in the present, we're just sort of observing this family try to figure out what we already know. And so I'm curious about that decision and how sort of making that decision focuses the reader so much on and their dynamic, rather than the mystery, which was a little bit more at the forefront in Bookshop of Yesterdays, your last book.
Yeah, so one of the main questions of the book is, what can we learn from the artifacts that are left behind about history, and what is forever lost to history? So I wanted, and actually the prologue came in maybe a later draft. I can't remember exactly, but it was towards the end. It wasn't in the earlier drafts. And it just had felt like something was missing, jumping right into when they discovered that their grandmother has died. So what I really wanted is I wanted us to know at the beginning and this isn't giving anything away because it's right at the beginning of the book, you know, have a shot at the beginning of this person getting the Florentine Diamond. And being given the Florentine Diamond by the emperor. So at the beginning of the book, you don't know who this person is who gets it. I think probably readers will figure out who the person is before the family does, a little bit before. Certainly when they suspect that it is, when the characters, I should say, suspect that it is, the reader will know for certain. So it isn't so much about figuring out what happened as will they be able to figure out why it happened. Because with a civil forfeiture case, what you have to, which if you're interested, there's a lot about it in the book. I'm really interested in law, and so sometimes I forget that other people aren't always as interested in the intricacies of it. But basically with these kinds of cases, because there isn't any paperwork to prove that the diamond is lawfully theirs, what an art lawyer told me was that if there's a really great, incredible story about how something generous that someone may have done that would make it seem likely that the emperor or somebody had gifted the diamond, then the courts could reasonably believe that this was a gift and not stolen. So that's all dependent. That's not dependent on these facts of how it was handed over, but really why it was handed over. So for me anyway, I think where the suspense comes from is, will they figure out not that the grandmother had the diamond, but or even how she had the diamond, but why she had the diamond in order to prove that it was lawfully hers. So it's sort of, I think, resonates with the themes of the book, in terms of what is often lost to history, which isn't the facts, but kind of the narrative behind those facts, I guess. If
Yeah,
that makes sense.
absolutely. And I think even if the law is not that is fascinating to all readers, this book makes it accessible and interesting, kind of regardless.
Yeah, I had to learn a ton, and I tried to pare it down as much as possible. So it's not super heavy law. It's kind of, I think probably most people, I certainly have never heard of a civil forfeiture case before. And so one of the interesting challenges too is civil forfeiture cases are done almost entirely on paper. So it's not that dynamic of the courtroom where you bring in witnesses and stuff like that. But I think that actually benefits the story, because then it's really about the family investigating the past as opposed to the court case that comes out of it.
Right, right. Yeah. Um, okay. From there, uh, I want to step back a little bit from the diamond, step back a little bit from the sort of legal issues of this book, because I think that after Bookshop of Yesterdays, you sort of became quite known for how should it, like, family dynamics, right? The relationships between people in a family. That was very much at the heart of your first book, and I think that's why we saw it do so well. Um, and I think that that is so much equally at play in this book, especially kind of in the fighting, in all of the disagreements that happen in this family. There is sort of a family-wide tension, and then there are also these individual side issues, between siblings and between the siblings and their mother, and even in the year 1918 between the emperor's family and the person who receives the diamond, and that sort of travels through history. Uh, and I'm interested in this, especially because I noted how much of the tension results in people yelling at each other and in these like pretty, verbally violent confrontations. I'm curious how you thought about family dynamics and why make that so intense and kind of explosive.
Sure. I mean, I think a lot of writers probably feel this way. I find families forever interesting, because they're often the most important people in your lives, but they're not the people that you select to be in your life for the most part. And so, I think well, with the Bookshop of Yesterdays, part of what interested me there was that there's an estrangement at the center of that book, but there's also an estrangement at the center of my own family. That my mom was estranged from her father for most of my life until her father passed away. And so I think and I also I have a pretty small family. We have some extended family that we're close to, but growing up, it was often just my immediate family, which was my brother and my parents and myself. So I've always been interested in families that are a little bit bigger than that, and what it's like which doesn't really happen in this book, but to grow up with cousins who are like siblings and things like that. So I mean, one of the things I'm drawn to about families too is I think sometimes families are the people that we can be our ugliest selves with, and they're also the people who will often forgive us quickly. And I like that tension. There's a lot of that in this book, where the characters say really ugly things to each other, but then they forgive each other really quickly. And I do think that that's something, I mean, that might not be true with all families, but I think that that's something that's really beautiful about the relationship that comes up. In my last book, the character was an only child, so I really wanted to explore adult siblings in this family. And I think, odd numbers are always really interesting, because it means that there's people team up on each other and there's competing allegiances, and it's always sort of shifting. So I thought that that created a good dynamic, to have three siblings as opposed to just two. But yeah, I think, you know, I'm really interested in also the ways in which families can heal and forgive each other, and how the past plays a role in that. So that was something that I started to realize I was interested in with my first book, and develop more with this book. And I have a feeling will be some sort of theme in my other books as well.
Sure. Yeah. I think you had this woman in the book when, and I don't remember who it was, but someone outside of the was observing the siblings fighting. Maybe it was Prohibition. And sort of, it clearly is someone who doesn't have siblings. The comment was just sort of, he didn't understand the polarity and how quickly siblings can switch from hating each other and yelling at each other to sort of forgiving and loving each other.
Yeah, and it was in Christian when they were in Vienna.
Yeah, and it makes the reader, I think, feel a certain intimacy with the siblings too, because you have the sense of someone as an outsider watching this and not being sort of clued into it.
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of, when you've grown up with someone, you see different iterations of the same, perhaps frustrating character traits as they evolve during a person's life. And it's usually the same. I mean, I think it's true in partners too, right? It's the same things that usually annoy you forever about the people you're close to. Moments of with siblings and parents where we see traits of our own that we don't really like in them, and so we tend to pick on those ones. So there's lots of, you know, so much of how you relate to your family is as much about yourself as it is about them.
Oh, absolutely.
And I thought yeah. And one of the things I liked about this, later in the book, they go to Vienna with this translator. I liked having a clear outside observer, as you're saying, to watch them, so that we can kind of see or think about, we know the characters so well at that point, and we can also see what they look like from an outside perspective.
Right. I think that perspective kind of gets at this other piece that I found really interesting at this book, which is a little bit about how you structured the narrative. Talk a little bit about the prologue, but for folks who don't have the book yet, get the book. You must read it. But I'll sort of let you know something that doesn't give anything away. But early in the book, we find out that Jake, who is the middle sibling, he's a filmmaker, and he, maybe a year or two earlier, correct me, Amy, made a film.
Oh, 6 years earlier. Yeah.
Okay, so 6 years earlier, he made a film that is pretty offensive to his family because it's about them, and I think it shows their ugliest sides, and those things are also true, but they lack a certain perspective, right? And so we have that as this beginning frame, and then the book ends with Jake creating another film. This is also based on his family, but perhaps it's based on deeper understanding, or an understanding that's more steeped in the discovery of his family history. And it creates this really kind of lovely bookending of the book. And I would love to hear you talk about this and of what it means for a story to be framed within one person's understanding, right? Even if it's told in the third person and we feel like we're close to all of the characters.
Yeah, which is interesting to say that, because I think, for me, I think if anyone, the book kind of belongs to Beck, the youngest sibling. At least she gets the most kind of face time in the book. Right. But in addition to thinking about, you know, what can we learn from the past based on what's left behind, I was really interested just in the sort of nature of storytelling and who gets to tell what stories. So it's not just what stories remain from history, but how can we continue to tell them in ways that are productive. And so I was thinking a lot about that as I was getting started, and I liked the fact that they were on this quest to kind of uncover stories, and yet a story of their family was also what drove them apart. And with the movie that Jake made, it's a good movie, right? It's at Sundance, but the problem with it is that it kind of laughs at his family instead of sort of celebrating their flaws with them. And so it really exposes them. He's also kind of the hero of the story, so it's super tone deaf, and it's called My Summer of Women. Both of them. So it's just there's a lot that shows that he's not really thinking deeply in the way that he should be to be telling other people's stories. And throughout the book, he tries to tell some other people's stories that he shouldn't be telling as well, mostly women. But what might seem contradictory about this is I actually had a lot of empathy for Jake, and I actually really like his character. He's just he's like just a little bit of an idiot who needs to grow up. So I think at the end, I want readers to ask. Certainly the Millers feel like the story that he tells at the end is respectful, whereas the one earlier isn't. And the one that at the end is him kind of creating that space between the prologue and where their grandmother gets the diamond. So it's everything that they kind of uncover through artifacts, bringing it to life in this movie that appears at the end of the book. And I think the Millers find that it is respectful. And, I think part of why it's respectful is the first movie really is about Jake. And this one is not about Jake at all. He's not even in it. And he was making it to sort of celebrate his grandmother, whereas the first one wasn't a celebration of the family. So I think that the Millers find it respectful. I think as an author, I found it respectful too, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all readers will. And I want readers to ask that question, because that is a question I'm interested in terms of who gets to tell what stories and who gets to also be the arbiter of whether or not that person can tell those stories.
Great. Can we dig into that a little bit? Because I want to be specific about the stories that Jake tries to tell that really don't belong to him are a series of script drafts that end up living in his bad script ideas folder. And these are about his friend's mom's immigration, about a coworker's sister's muscular dystrophy, his girlfriend's mom's story. And so there are all these stories that are a number of times removed from him, but they're also stories that belong to women.
And this makes him sound like such a jerk.
I know. Yeah, I really didn't on him, but I find it interesting because I think you're right that Beck is the sibling and she's the youngest sister who it does feel like this book belongs to her. And because of that, I think Jake, foils her in an interesting way. For folks who are watching this, there is a sort of flashback to Beck in high school in which her English teacher treats her and a lot of the girls in her class and in her grade pretty poorly. I would say extremely poorly. He's pretty inappropriate. She talks about the way that his eyes linger on her body, and this sort of mixture of arousal and disgust that she detects from him. And then he gives all of the girls terrible grades in his class. And this stuck out to me, and stuck out in contrast to Jake, I think, because this is ultimately a book about, as you say in the book, brave women who did what they needed to do in order to survive. And so I'm interested in the contrast and the framing there.
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I haven't been asked that before. So I think, there's a lot of elements of it. I wanted this book, when I was writing it, I didn't, with the stuff with the teacher, I wasn't writing a Me Too book, but it was going on while I was writing it. So I was certainly thinking about that. And basically and this I don't think gives too much away, what happens in Jake's first movie is that it exposes a mistake that Beck made in her past that kind of sets her future. And particularly his film plays a role in that. So I really wanted Beck's mistake for the reader to be able to see that she clearly made a mistake in what she did, but that it was a response to her feeling voiceless and to her feeling somewhat abused by her teacher in the past. And so to me, that's a more interesting dynamic where we have justifiable reasons for something, even if we make the wrong choice, as opposed to it was just, you know, she was just being reckless and there was no justification for it. It creates this kind of moral grayness, which I think to a certain extent Jake has. So there's a part in the middle of the book when Jake goes to talk to somebody from his grandmother's past who's at a nursing home, because like his grandmother is 92. This character is even a little bit younger than she was. And this old man says to him, if we don't tell stories, they disappear, which I think is an important point and theme in the book, but it's about understanding that. And I do think that with Jake, and it can, you know, I don't want to get too gendered about things, but I think something that can sometimes happen with storytelling when men tell women's stories is that they, you know, certainly Jake does, he feels a certain privilege to these women's stories because he cares about them. So I do think, much kind of like Beck, that he wants to tell the stories for the right reason, but he doesn't really understand why they might not belong to him. And I don't think I could have had that same dynamic if it wasn't a man telling a woman's story. Sure. And I guess sort of the irony at the end, which is why I sort of leave it up, I think I want to leave it up to the reader to decide what they think, is that he's still telling a story that's not his, and he's still telling a woman's story. His movie at the end is called The Women's Empire, or The Empire. Yeah. And it's weird how sometimes you forget little things about your own book. It's like The Empire of Women or Women's Empire. I think it's Women's Empire. But you know, he's still telling women's story, but in a way, I think that honors them more. But so it seems like, and it also seems very Hollywood to me. There are a lot of women's stories that are told by men in Hollywood.
Right. Absolutely. Amazing. Well, I'm going to go ahead and open it up. If anyone has a question, please go to the bottom of your screen and send us your question, and I will be happy to repeat it for Amy. We do have one here that says, Amy, what do you think about the audiobook productions of your novels?
I love it. I actually just asked my editor today if I could get a copy of the new one. I think it's so interesting to hear somebody else read your book and hear the different ways that they express it. I'm actually finding that right now. I have a 6-month-old, so I've been reading a lot of children's books, and my partner and friends have read my son children's books too, and everybody reads the same story a little bit differently, which I find so interesting. And it's rare to get to hear your own words through someone else, not only their voice, but their perspective. So, you know, sometimes things are funnier when somebody else reads them. So it's just, you can learn a lot about your story, and it's probably the closest you can get to a sense of objectivity. So I'm really, really excited to hear the audio for this one. It's also really fun to pick the audiobook narrator. You get to hear a couple of different samples, and then I always do like a deep dive to see what other books they've done and things. Is that here or is that you?
That was a plane going over. I actually just listened to the audiobook of The Imperfects. So I read it initially, 6 months ago, I would say. And so I just listened to the audiobook yesterday. And I can say to everyone out there, the reader was wonderful. And I will recommend that if you're going the audiobook route, you can get it from Libro FM, which is an independent audiobook app. And if you buy your audiobooks through there, you can choose to send part of your purchase to an independent bookstore of your choice. So we highly recommend that. Amy, what is your next book going to be?
So I'm pretty early in the process. I reserve the right to change my mind, but I don't think I will. I want to tell a story of a family, and I like the idea of telling stories of families through slightly untraditional ways. So what I'm thinking about doing is telling about 100 years of this family's story, of a family who, I just saw my mom say hello in the comments, who own a vineyard and winery in Santa Barbara wine country. So one of the things, and this is kind of how I generally generate ideas, is that I don't even remember where I learned it, but I learned a little something about wine during Prohibition, and that a bunch of, more in Northern California than Southern California, but that a bunch of vineyards were able to stay open during Prohibition, either from selling sacramental wine or they actually sold grapes. And people during Prohibition were allowed to make, I think it's 200 gallons of wine a year at home, which actually is an incredible amount of wine.
I'm gonna say,
yeah. So a lot of these vineyards were able to, not really in Southern California, but in Northern California, able to survive, and that really interested me. So I've been doing, so I sort of wanted it to grow from there. So it's going to be about the longest run vineyard in Southern California.
I love that.
And there's a little mystery thrown in, but I haven't quite figured out what the mystery. I mean, I know what the mystery is, but I haven't quite figured out the details of it.
Okay, fantastic. What are you reading right now? Are you reading?
I'm trying my best. Reading is very different with a 6-month-old than it was before. Although I've definitely discovered children's books, and they're wonderful. And there's, but so I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks.
Okay.
And I most listen, and it's interesting. It's kind of the opposite of what I just said, that I like to hear somebody else tell my stories. When I listen to audiobooks, I really like listening to nonfiction and in the author's voice. So I listened recently to The Library Book by Susan Orlean, which is fantastic. And I listened to Save Me the Plums by Ruth Reichel, which was also really great. And I just listened to Dani Shapiro's Inheritance, which is fascinating. And I'm kind of glad I didn't listen to it before I wrote The Bookshop of Yesterdays. I think it came out before then. I'm glad I discovered it now. And then otherwise, I've been reading a lot of books, galleys that haven't come out yet. And I just started reading A Gentleman in Moscow. I'm about 100 pages in. Because Do
you love it as much as everyone seems to?
Yeah, I'm not very far yet, but that's why I'm because I had been having trouble focusing a little bit, like sitting down. I mean, also when you have a book coming out, your attention is very frayed and fragmented. So I felt like enough people have loved that book, and it's been sitting next to my bed for about 8 months, that I decided it was time to, there's a lot of books sitting next to my bed for a long time. I decided it was time to try to pick it up, and it's an amazing, great book. I wanted to help get me back into reading more, especially when I don't have as much time as I used to. I wanted to read something that I knew I would fall in love with.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that is all of our questions. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to hear about The Imperfects. It is out now. We have copies at Tattered Cover Bookstore, and we would love to ship it to you. And we have poet Cody Simpson coming on here tomorrow. New collection, Prince of Neptune. That'll be with our marketing director, McKaylee Osley. And I will be back on the Instagram on May 19th to talk to Kristen Arnett about her paperback of Mostly Dead Things, which I highly recommend. So thank you so much, Amy.
Yes, thank you everyone for coming, and I hope you like The Imperfects, and I would love to hear what you think if you get a chance to read it.
Amazing. Thanks. Come back soon, everybody. Okay, bye.
Bye, Afton.